Okay, so what we're going to be doing in the first part of this video is updating the game state. So what we need to do is we need to go into our view controller and we need to add some code to our button tap. So when our button is tapped, what we want to do is we want to grab the letter of the button's title and store it in a letter string variable. So that will let us, so we can use that to go ahead and compare to see if that letter was actually contained in the word that we're currently working with. So in order to get that, we will call upon the sender.title property to grab that method to grab that information, and what it's going to be .normal for the state, and we're going to add an exclamation point. We're going to be covering why you would add an exclamation point in the next unit. So the next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and lowercase our letter string. So we will just have that equal to character and then letter string, and then we're going to lowercase it. Okay, so that's our function in our button tapped. So now what we need to do is we need to keep track of the various letters that the user has guessed. So let's go back into our actual struct, and what we need to do is we need to create another variable, and it's going to be an array of characters, and what we're going to save in those are the actual characters that the user had selected. And then what we need to do next is we need to go in and actually add a mutating method so we can go ahead and update our guessed letters array. So I'm going to pause the video at the code and then we'll talk about the code after. Okay, I've gone in, added the code that they talked about in the book. There's one update we need to make. Basically what we need to do is we need to delete characters in our call there. So what we're doing is what gets passed into this mutating function if the character that was guessed, and what we're going to do is we're going to add that to our append that to our guessed letters array, and then if the letter is not in the word that we're going to be using as part of this game, then we'll go ahead and decrement our incorrect moves remaining by 1. So after we do that, we will go into our view controller, and what we need to do in there is we need to go into our new round. So we need to go in and we have to update it for our guessed letters when we actually go ahead and create our instance, and then we have to update it in up above too, so it'll just be guessed letters and an empty array. Okay, so we've made our updates there, and then what we need to do is enable that string. We need to go into our button tap method, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our current game dot player guessed letter to the letter that was guessed, and then we need to update the UI. Okay, so they want us to go ahead and run our code. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move on to part 4. So what we want to do is using the word and the guessed letters, we can now complete compute a version of the word that hides the missing letters. So that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to begin with an empty variable. We're going to loop through each character of the word. If the character is in guessed letters, we're going to convert it to a string and then append the letter on the variable. And what we're going to do that in is in a computed property within our structure called formatted words. So let me go back into my struct, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video right now, add the code, and then we'll talk about the code. Okay, I've gone in and added the code again. Based on the information that's in the book, we need to make another update. We need to get rid of the dot characters after word, so it's just for letter in word. So we'll iterate through our string. If the guessed letters contains the letters, then what we're going to do is we're going to add that letter to our guessed letters, else we're going to go ahead and add a dash. And then we're going to return the guessed word. So in order to use that property, we need to go ahead and update our UI functions. So let me just Command S to go ahead and save. And then what I want, let me go ahead and increase this. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding that information, our correct word label, word label.text property is going to equal our current game dot formatted word. Okay, so it looks like what we're going to be doing, oh, it looks like we have an issue there. So let me just go ahead and press on the stop sign. Okay, so it looks like up above when I set up my connection or my outlet for corrected words, it should be corrected word label instead of corrected words label. So I want to go ahead and update that. So I want to update both the code and the actual outlet. So in order to do that, you just select the variable that you want to update, right click on it, click on refactor, and then rename. And then once I do that, I can just go ahead and rename it, and that rename will actually apply to the outlet that it's attached to. So let me just go ahead and click on rename. And now if we scroll on down to the bottom, eventually this compile error should leave. The text tree image. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and build and run our application. The UI has come up, so now let's take a look, see if this is working. Our first word was Swift, so I'll enter a couple of incorrect letters, and then finally I entered an S, enter a W, I'll enter my T. So the one problem we have with this right now is that because multiple underscores appear as a solid line in the interface, it can be difficult to tell how many letters are in the word. So to properly set the text of our current word label, we can use a Swift method called joined with a separator that operates on an array of strings. This function will concatenate the collection of strings into one string separated by a given value. So I'm just going to go ahead, go back into my code, quit my build, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add some code to my update UI function. After I'll pause the video to do that, and then we'll talk about. Okay, I've gone in, I've updated the code in our UI. Again, we have a error with the characters. So what we're doing is we're creating an array of letters. If the letter is in the current game, then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and append that letter to letters. And then we're going to use word with spacing, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call letters, and what we're going to do is we're going to separate our entries in an array by an extra space. And then our correct word label.text will now equal our word with spacing. So let's go ahead and run the application and see if that the application has came up, so now we're going to go ahead and test this a little bit. The first word again is Swift. If I select the S, you can see the little space between the dashes, so now we know exactly how many letters are in the word. I'll just go ahead and find the T and select that. So it looks like that is working correctly. So now the last thing we need to do is we need to write the code to handle a win or loss. So we will talk to you in the next video to complete this application.